Welcome to the Morrison Report. Hosted by Deval Morrison, sales representative for Bosley Real Estate Limited Brokerage. Ms. Morrison has co-authored the best-selling book, Success Today, with Brian Tracy, and has been interviewed on NBC, ABC, and CBS affiliates by Bob Guinea from The Bachelor. Deval, a real estate investor, has spoken to many attendees at her real estate seminars and is currently ranked in the top 5% of agents in her brokerage. Join me in welcoming your host, Deval Morrison.
Welcome to the Morrison Report. I wanted to create a podcast that would give people insights into the Toronto real estate market. You can follow me on Twitter at Deval Morrison and on Instagram as Deval Morrison, and you can like my business page on Facebook. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we have with us Murtaza Haider. He's the Associate Professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management, Ryerson University in Toronto. He's also the Director of Consulting firm Regionomics Inc. and a regular contributor to the Huffington Post. Welcome, Murtaza. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. I am an academic and I teach at Ryerson University's business program. I've been researching real estate markets since the mid-90s. I wrote a master's and a PhD dissertation on housing prices and housing growth forecasting models. Became a professor of land development and infrastructure at McGill University after my degree was done at the University of Toronto, and then came back to Toronto from McGill in mid-2006, around that time, and started teaching real estate economics at Ryerson University. I usually do research in housing markets, real estate markets, and also I'm a demand forecaster. I do studies on transportation.
Awesome. Wow. You sound really smart. I know I
make people believe that, but that's not the truth.
We're going to learn a lot from you today. Can you tell us, I guess, sort of an overview, what do you think about the Toronto real estate market, and what do you think we can learn from other cities around the world with respect to housing?
Well, the housing market in Toronto is a very robust market, and it is surprising to me to see people are complaining about the market as it grows, and I think they haven't experienced a decline in housing prices and sales since, I think, 1989, 1990. So most of those who may be not very pleased with the rapid rise in prices may have forgotten the lessons they learned in the early 90s or late 80s. It's a robust market. It's growing maybe faster than most people would like it to grow, but it's a growing market, and that's a good thing. What can we learn from cities like Toronto? And I say cities like Toronto, these are the cities that are actually global cities. They are not being desired just by those who live there, but there is a global demand for, or a global desire to live in those cities. So you can compare Toronto to London and New York City or Sydney. And the thing that you will learn about these cities is that they generate their demand for real estate, not just by those who live there or those who live in the country, but there's a global desire to live there. And hence you see buyers not just from the city, but also from around the globe investing in real estate. What we can see about this, what Toronto should know, is that it will continue to be a very desirable place, and that its prices may continue to grow, may not grow at the rate it's growing at now for a long term, but the prices will continue to grow because just like London and just like New York City, Toronto is a very desirable place to live.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I certainly love it. And I know when I travel around to other cities, I can certainly recognize why I love Toronto, why I think it's a great place to be. So, I mean, you kind of highlighted about the fact that, you know, our market has been in demand and we've seen growth for so many years. When do you think that growth might end? I mean, that's always sort of the $1 million question. Everybody thinks, you know, when is that correction going to happen? Because we have seen so much of an increase for so long. You know, economically speaking, we know that all markets are cyclical. So when does the cycle change for Toronto, do you think?
Well, first thing is, if I could predict that, I wouldn't be just sitting here. I'll be in a lot better place somewhere doing a lot more trading and forecasting. It's difficult to forecast, especially into the future.
Right.
When will it change? Nobody knows. There are reasons to believe it will continue to grow, both in terms of sales and in prices, but at a slower rate, not the same 20% a year-on-year increase. I have read and I've heard on television over the past 10 years, many pundits who have come and said next year it's going to flop. And they've been proven consistently wrong, but that has not deterred the naysayers from making erroneous forecasts about Toronto's housing market. The reason for its growth, or sustained growth, are demographic. There's a greater demand. The city continues to grow. Toronto as a city grows by about 4.5%. The overall Toronto region grows by 6%. And even though I see growth slowing down in the 9 to 5 regions, the demographic growth, but there's enough growth to sustain both an increase in the number of sales year over year and increase in prices. When will that change? I think the biggest shift will be seen when you have a significant change in interest rates. When the mortgage rates hit 5% or 7%, then this kind of growth in prices and sales that we see now, you will see that slowing down or even reversing in direction. But when you have mortgage rates sitting around 2.5%, then it makes the economy gives clear signals to the agents to borrow money because it makes sense to borrow money at such low rates. And until that demographic shift changes and this market price signals change, that is, interest rates increase considerably, until that happens, I don't see or expect a big shift in the way Toronto's residential real estate market is evolving.
Got it. That makes sense. Do you think our city officials are doing enough to increase the housing supply with respect to permits and innovative thinking like condos and houses or laneway housing?
My fear is that, you talk about city officials, it's not a generic thing, it's not an homogeneous product. You have those who are responsible for economic development, then there's those who are responsible for urban planning. So if I were to look at those who are responsible for economic planning or budgeting of the city, they should be pleased with the growth in housing prices because the revenue the city earns comes from primarily property taxes and land transfer taxes. If the increase in property prices slows down or even reverses, it would hurt the city's revenue. So those officials responsible for the dollars and cents of the city, I wouldn't expect them to be complaining about the increase in housing prices. They would be very concerned about the alternative scenario when this growth starts to slow down and the city's revenue would suffer from it. The other set of officials are the urban planning staff that is responsible for the urban design and look and feel of the city. And they're also responsible for clearing the application for new development. I think that group perhaps needs some help. They may be in denial of understanding how the markets or real estate markets work. Judging by some of the tweets of some of the people who work there, they've been arguing that there has not been, first, a shortage of supply of new housing in the city. Then I learned from the tweets that, in fact, if you build more housing, that wouldn't have any impact on prices. So there's a fundamental lack of understanding of how the real estate markets and how the urban economics work. And until that education happens with those responsible for the planning process, they may not even see this as a problem because their tweets certainly are not mindful of how the real estate markets in reality function. They actually don't understand the relationship between demand and supply. If you were to argue that if you build new homes, rich people will buy it and hence it would not affect the affordability of housing, that shows a fundamental lack of understanding of how the filtering mechanism in housing markets work. Even when you build higher price homes, it creates a chain of trades that start from the top and go all the way to the down, creating more supply of housing at all levels of prices, not just at the very top. And that's what we call the filtering model. And until and unless you have staff that actually understands this, may have taken a course or have practiced urban economics or real estate economics, that realization would not happen. Because denying that supply is not causing or contributing to price inflation, or not understanding what role housing supply or construction of new housing plays in promoting affordability. That and lack of understanding is detrimental for the growth of the city.
I would definitely agree. Absolutely. Because, I would agree 100%. Because I certainly see there is an issue with the supply, obviously, when the prices keep going so high because there isn't enough product.
Yeah, so if you have part of the city staff that argues that supply has no bearing on it, then I start to get worried about it because I don't know what books they are reading or who's advising them.
Yeah, you're right. That makes a lot of sense. Do you think the city is doing enough to ensure that our infrastructure can keep up with the pace of the condo development in the 416, especially with respect to transit and even the sewer system? I've heard, for example, there isn't enough water pressure at some of the downtown condos, for example.
Well, here's what I want you and the listeners to do. That around 8 or 8:30, just walk down to Union Station near Bay Street and Front Street and see the flood of people coming out of Union Station, and see if there's enough walkways or sidewalks to contain that flood of commuters coming out of Union and walking towards the downtown core. There's one thing worrying about what's in the infrastructure buried underground. You can actually look at how the city is now reaching its capacity by looking at the rush in the path, underground path. You can't walk without having your shoulders bruised every 3 steps. You can't walk on the sidewalks anymore now, given the heavy flux of people. There are about 500,000 people who work in downtown Toronto, in the core of Toronto. And then if you continue to increase, the very superficial, easy-to-fix infrastructure, that is sidewalks and whatnot, is insufficient. What is difficult to fix are the sewers and the storm sewers and the water supply and water main pipes that, given the age of the city of Toronto, must be very old in places that they have not been replenished or improved. So the shorter argument of saying this is that I think in the downtown core, we have reached capacity in terms of the infrastructure. We also have reached capacity in terms of transit infrastructure. 70 to 75% of those who work in downtown Toronto and arrive there in the morning peak period arrive by public transit. 75%. You can't take it to 90%. They're marginal. The return in increasing more ridership to transit would be very difficult above and beyond 70-75%. You can increase transit ridership to an area where maybe 10% of the people arrive by transit. You can double it to 20%, maybe triple it to 30%. But in the downtown core, where you have 75% or so people arriving already by public transit, you can't add more to it because it gets really difficult at that very high level of saturation. So transit infrastructure is at capacity. The sidewalks are at capacity. I'm quite confident that the underground infrastructure is old, if it has not been replaced, it lacks redundancy and probably some lack of knowledge of the state of good repair of that infrastructure. Having said that, adding more to downtown core and hoping that you can build your way out of it would be wishful thinking, and it would create living there a little bit more congested, a little bit less enjoyable. I understand people argue that downtown living is coming back, but I think it has come back. It was there 10 years ago. Now every additional person who arrives in downtown Toronto would have less per square footage of space, social space for them. You don't have parks, you don't have recreational grounds. And one thing that, as a parent of 2 young sons, my own life is defined by carrying hockey bags and running back and forth to soccer fields and taking these large equipment bags to hockey arenas. I must say I've never seen anyone carrying hockey bags on TTC. I must say I've never seen anyone walking around with big hockey bags in downtown core,
right.
Which tells me that you don't have that kind of space. Stop convincing yourself with the false argument that downtown core living is good for children and people are having a blast. If they are, then how come my life, surrounded by other similar aged parents carrying heavy hockey bags,
that I see in the suburbs, and I don't see those parents or those children, dressed up as in their hockey gear in downtown. That's a false image that the city wants you to, some in the city want you to believe in. You have less square footage in social space available to